Hey folks, David Stewart here. Can you write sequels that change settings? So this is actually a super chat. My live stream kind of crapped out on me and I couldn't answer all the super chats, so this one gets its own video. Paid for it. I want to deliver some value here, and it's a great question. I'll go ahead and read it. It's from David Dilks. How hard is it to make a sequel to a franchise in a different setting? For example, a fourth Lord of the Rings in a space/sci-fi or Wild West setting. And the answer is it's probably difficult. It's probably more difficult from a commercial standpoint than a creative standpoint. Creatively, lots of writers are able to move in and out of their genres because what happens is when you change the setting, you're usually going to change the genre that you're operating in, at least a little bit. And there's a really good example to how you can actually get away with this, and that is Alloy of Law, which is a Brandon Sanderson novel. It's technically, I think, the fourth book in the Mistborn series, but the Mistborn series is really a trilogy, a dark or high fantasy trilogy. It ends, and then this book happens way later after technology has advanced and you're kind of in the equivalent of like late 19th century or something like that. And so it has this progress of time, but the Sandersonian hard magic system that fans really like is still there, and it creates kind of an interesting interaction with that setting. Now, I think he's able to pull that off for a couple of reasons, both commercially and creatively. First one, commercially, is that Brandon Sanderson has a really strong brand associated with his name. He has a strong fan base that is willing to read him in a variety of genres, not just high fantasy, which is what he's most well known for. And so they're going to be more willing to take a chance on something that is high fantasy, but maybe has, different technology in it, or maybe has elements of like a detective story or a steampunk elements or something like that. They're going to be willing to take a chance on something that's really different from that. If you were to write a fourth Lord of the Rings book but make it Wild West, well, there's reasons that people liked the original Lord of the Rings, and if you transfer it into the Wild West, you're now really writing a Western. And so the fans of medieval fantasy like Lord of the Rings are probably not going to be very interested in a Western story just because it happens to be some sort of technical follow-up to the story that they actually like. So the commercial problem is you're probably going to lose the audience, some of the audience at least, along the way. And you can overcome that by having that strong brand like what Brandon Sanderson has. The other thing is the creative part, which is writing outside the genre, because once you change the setting style, you're going to have to be more creative with your writing. You're going to have to be writing outside of your comfort zone a little bit. But Brandon Sanderson, as an example, can write in multiple genres, and he's a talented writer and skilled and very well practiced. So for him to write in, he wrote a superhero kind of book, a young adult superhero book. He can write outside of the high fantasy genre, and he himself, when he writes in high fantasy, doesn't stick to the kind of high fantasy that's full of, it's not, it definitely has fantasy tropes, but it's not like packed with medieval fantasy tropes like a copy of Tolkien or something like that. He always has like really unique worlds. So for him, he could probably pull it off. For other writers, it's going to be a lot tougher to pull it off. That's not to say you can never do it. It's just the audience, you might lose the audience along the way because of what they were attracted to in the original property. So they might be attracted to some specific element in the setting. So if you were to have Harry Potter, but it's in space, right? Like it's 200 years in the future, but there's wizards in space. That might be really cool. It might be a big hit, but one of the reasons people really liked Harry Potter is it was this modern escapist fantasy where you're escaping from the modern world. If you're already in the future, there's no escapist element. It's not going to feel the same way to the readers, but they might be interested in it just because it's the same writer in the same universe with the same rules, and maybe getting to see the reverberation of the events from like the original series. There's lots of things that you can do that would sell that, but I think in general it's something that is very difficult to pull off commercially, have it be really commercially successful. So yes, you can do it. There's examples of people doing it, but it's not going to be the easiest thing to pull off. Now, I've actually done this, so I'm going to talk about how I did this. So here's Water of Awakening. This is like this is not even the original first edition of the book. This is like a pre-release version of the book because like the I this is like the original anyway. So it usually says like A Tale of the Eternal Dream up here. So this is the Eternal Dream number 1. I'm hoping to get Eternal Dream number 3 done this year. We'll see. We've got a lot of stuff going on. But technically, this is in the same universe as City of Silver and Tyrant's Gallo. But these are way later in like an alternate future, thousands of years later, where technology's advanced. So this is actually more like, I think people have called it Flintlock fantasy. There's guns, but there's strong fantasy elements. It's a high fantasy novel. This is more like medieval fantasy, fairy tale fantasy in its own way. It definitely has its own flavor to it if you decide to pick it up. It's not really like a copy of Tolkien. It does some different weird things for sure. But these are, this is an example. We've changed the setting a little bit. It's the same place, the same time, but this is like pirates. Tyrant's Gallo is like Pirate Island, right? But it's fantasy. So I've done it, but I view these as 2 separate series, and they're both going to be completing together at the same time, and they'll actually have a tie-in way in the future once I get around to working on all the mini projects that I've got going on. It's slow and steady wins the race. You just got to do that work every day, and eventually everything gets done. So I've done it, and that's kind of how I did it. And the elements that are present in both of them are those fantasy elements, like different world, different cultures, and really, as long as you have really strong characters driving the story and you have a good solid plot, readers will pick up something that has different setting elements and enjoy it just fine. There's very few readers that are going to be like, I won't ever read something because it has guns. I only want sword fantasy. I only want sword and sorcery, no guns. Very few readers are actually like that. The real question is whether they'll buy some sequel follow-up that has that. So I split them up like they're really, I market them as separate things, and they're separate lengths. The Eternal Dream books are a little more hefty, and then the other ones are kind of more serial. They're a little shorter, like 40 to 60,000 word range rather than 120,000 or something like that. So I do them a little bit differently, but I've done it too. People really like City of Silver, so you can check that out. I think it's 99 cents. You can start the series, and hopefully I'll have book 3 of that series going on this year too. So thanks so much, and I'll see you guys next time.